So this morning we have a former Minister of Power join us for this conversation, Professor Bath Naji. He joined us virtually. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Prof. Well, I know you must be... Good morning, sir. I know you must have been... You must be as concerned as every Nigerian is right now about the frequent power outages, especially because, I mean, you had to deal with it as well when you were in government. What do you think we're dealing with? It seems intractable.
Well, yes, you said intractable. If the situation is, if the structure that should address the problem is not in place, first of all, our population continues to grow. And so there's more demand for power. And naturally, if we are not putting on the grid more power, we will continue to have the collapse. I mean, it's just a natural phenomenon. Yes, so we're all concerned.
When you...
And it's something that has to be cured.
Yes, when you had to deal with this personally as minister in charge, what were the things you discovered? And is there any way that you think maybe those things have not been dealt with?
Yes, there are a number of things we discovered. One, if the transmission line is not constantly cleared and properly maintained, then when there is just foliage and the tree kills over, like if there's wind, it can cause system collapse. If we don't have some amount of power that is used as spinning reserve, so that you use such power for balance. During our time, what we used part of Egbin power plant, about 320 megawatts of Egbin, as a spinning reserve, such that if there is issue somewhere, then you can call up the power. But the system still also pays for the power. The lines must all continue to be in good order. So maintenance is a critical part of it. But also we have to continue as a country to build on the network so that we have a robust system that when you have a problem somewhere, you don't have the entire network cut off. My suggestion is that if we can have the regional grids that are semi-autonomous and such that the grids are still connected, you still have a national grid, but you have regions where the network, if there's any issue, the entire region, the rest of the regions will continue to operate. And even that region, based on the way the network is structured, can still operate except for where you have the fault. That's how it is in a lot of countries. In fact, there are some countries where you have hundreds of small networks connected still to a national grid to import power, especially where the power plants are not embedded. Another solution is, of course, the one that we have in Aba, which is a wholly autonomous, reasonably autonomous power utility, has embedded power plants within the distribution network.
Right, Prof. So, I mean, you've proffered, I think, at least 3 solutions now, and this is coming to add to other solutions that have been proffered in the past. But seeing that you have, I mean, you're experienced in the system, as it were, both as a public servant and even the private sector, Why do you think it is difficult to implement these solutions, which seem, I mean, simple, doesn't sound like rocket science? So why is it difficult to implement this for a sector which is as important as a power sector?
Well, I think that if I begin to look at what's happening now, I can't, because I don't know. It's always never good to be begin to look at people who are on the seat and see how they are seeing things. Maybe what they are seeing we don't really know, but I can only tell you what I saw and the solutions that we know if we brought will work. And there's another thing that we introduced, wanted to introduce, which is a super grid. And in fact, it was passed by the Federal Executive Council at the time, which is a 765 kV network around the country, so that the big power plants can put their power on that super grid, and then you will be able to have power that it's easier. Once it's looped around the country, then it is very helpful for transmission of power. And the quantum of power that can be transmitted in a country will require a different level of network. The quantum of power that we need in the country is not 13,000 megawatts. And Nigeria would require quite a significant amount of power to be able to address energy solution.
Right. So, well, we're still stuck at the point where we've not exactly been able to pinpoint why we're not implementing those solutions. Yes, I mean, you have a view from when you were in government. You have another view from practicing in the private sector. But it's still important, perhaps, to identify those issues, maybe from when you were in government or from your view now in the private sector. What would you say the problem is in implementing these solutions that are out there?
In terms of transmission, we simply require quite a significant investment in transmission. But to have that significant investment, it may not be government that can do it. It would require both the government and private sector investment. So one way to address it is to have the regionalization that I was talking about, and then have private sector participate. Maybe because of the way the privatization has been done in distribution and in particularly, it will seem as if it is it's not a good way to get private sector. But that's where the funds are in the private sector, if it is done correctly. Done correctly is what very important.
And I mean,
which means you need to get credible participants, financially and technically capable.
Interestingly, the president spoke to that. And I mean, you resigned from government in August 2012. And you saw some part of that, at least the privatization process, not up till the end, definitely, but you had some inside view, part of the, Council on Privatization and all of that. The president thinks that that is where we had our challenge, or that is where we still have the challenge. He says the TCN is government-owned, so doing fine to some extent. But when it comes to the discourse, first it says they were regionally split, and I think you've mentioned something about regionalizing the grid. But it says you just divided the country according to regions. The people that this were bundled to, they didn't have the expertise. They were not electrical engineers, or at least he asked if they were electrical engineers, if they had the money. So, do you agree with the president to that extent that it was faulty from the get-go?
I agree with that, because what we set in place when we were starting the privatization is that you should have the buyers of DisCos should have technical capacity and financial capacity. I think maybe people don't know that the distribution companies were not purchased, were not bidded for in terms of asset. The asset there wasn't asset bidding in terms of if A bids 100 million. B can bid 120 million on the asset. The bidding for DisCos was on losses, reduction of losses, average technical collection and commercial losses reduction. And the only way you can achieve such reduction is by investing heavily in the distribution infrastructure, the collection infrastructure, the billing system, metering. You have to really, really aggressively meter the system. So all these things are required to ensure that the distribution is robust. So that what we wanted to achieve is a credible distribution of taker, so that you remove the middleman in the system, which was Nigeria Bulk Electricity Trading PLC, which actually is government having to put its money in the system to kind of ensure that that if distribution companies don't pay, that you pay generation companies, which means that the government pays generation companies. So the intention was to have a direct handshake between generation companies and distribution companies, but the only way that can happen is if the distribution companies are creditworthy. And the only way they could be creditworthy is if you had technically and financially competent DisCos.
It beats my imagination.
Essentially, that wasn't achieved.
Okay, but this was meant to be, a good thing. This came and a lot of people thought it was going to end the power problem in Nigeria. But it's sad to hear that it was sort of mismanaged. And I wonder, is that why you resigned at that time or another reason?
Well, that's a major part of it because one could constitute himself a cog in the wheel.
So it would seem that from the get-go, the intentions for this were not quite, noble, at least to meet the yearnings of Nigerians. Because if this was not done the right way, given to competent people, then it's no wonder we're where we are today.
Well, the intention, the way, if you recall, the type of companies that bidded for the generation and distribution companies, and the influx of high quality investors. It was well intentioned, but like I said, it has to do with being able to select those who are technically and financially competent. And if we didn't achieve that, then we really have a challenge. And that's what eventually happened, that we did not get such players, or in some of the areas. And once we don't have that, then there is no way we can achieve the sort of investment that we need. There's a lot. If I use Aba as an example, if the asset value of Aba is 1 naira, we have invested more than 8 naira in the distribution infrastructure alone. And of course, we have embedded a power plant in that place. So it requires a tremendous investment in distribution. And you have to continue to invest year on year to maintain the infrastructure. That's really just what it requires. So what we wanted to do in distribution handoff to private sector was to have such investors, not merely investors that would borrow their money from the local source, but to be able to attract investment from outside the country, so that we would be able to not totally rely on what we have locally in terms of the government and the local banks.
Well, it's sounding to me a little that you are suggesting something that I think was the president of the Senate that also suggested it, that maybe we need to renegotiate this whole process so that we can smoothen out the rough edges and all of that. Because just as you have said, TCN is fully government-owned, GENCO's fully private sector, and DISCO's government and private sector run. And there are those who wonder if that is not where we are having problems. One of the things that's been touted as being responsible for the grid collapses, whether total or partial, is because of what they call load rejection. And I wonder what that meant. That DISCOs would be rejecting load from maybe the TCN or the GENCOs, and load that cannot be stored. So, and you have also listed some of the challenges that DISCOs themselves have. Is it a capacity problem here now, or an administrative problem, or what exactly is the issue with the DISCOs that they will be rejecting load that Nigerians really do need?
If a DISCO is doing estimated billing, then load rejection will continue, because what happens is that they want to bill that they would want to bill in particular areas on what they didn't really supply. So load rejection, and then if they didn't supply and rejected the load, then they have lower amount of energy to be billed, and which they have to pay for. So that's the load rejection. And so the solution to that is really improvement, a significant improvement in metering. If we achieve metering, significant metering, then there will be less load rejection. But even if when you talk about the load, there's now that we are running the Aba DISCO, we've seen quite a lot in terms of how the people down the line to the customer, what happens with them. The estimated billing is a very serious problem. The load rejection is a serious problem. And then you have inability to restore power at a number of places. So a transformer might go out, and it will take quite a long time, sometimes months, and in some cases even years to restore. Lines may go out, all kinds of small problems that shouldn't exist, which is why we said we should get people who have financial capacity so that these things will be addressed. So the DISCOs, I agree that it's maybe some degree of dilution would help to bring investors who can address these issues, because finance is required.
Okay.
The government, of course, is holding a percentage of the shares, the equity position in DISCOs. Maybe it can give up some or all of its own. The private sector investors, whereby they can't raise the capital to do it, should allow themselves to be diluted. And that's just the way. There's no other way other than to have investment. Government shouldn't really be subsidizing discourse. The intention wasn't for government to be subsidizing discourse.
Well, Prof, are you, by any chance, or would you, by any chance, call for a renegotiation of the entire power sector reform process that has brought us to where we are now, especially in the back of the ownership of the TCN by government and this percentage ownership of the discos?
Even a constitution continues to be looked at by countries. So I don't see why an arrangement this kind of arrangement cannot be looked at by all so that the solution. I don't think that the people who are running discos don't want success. They want success. And so it is totally viable that if we all sit together with government, we should be able to arrive at a structure that will make sense. And so where there is need for investments, we know who should invest, where should government invest, what should government do, what type of policy should the government have that will result in a working system like it is in a number of other emerging countries. So yes, I think that we should be able to do that.
People, so a lot of people can relate when we talk about discos, because I mean they're the ones that interface with the people essentially, but they're just one part of the value chain. There's a transmission part and the generation part. So yes, we've focused on what to do with the discos from your perspective, but what should we do with the GenCos and the TCN? Because it's been a back and forth. GenCos say, well, we have enough capacity to generate, but we keep getting a message from the TCN to step it down, shut down, don't give us too much. So what do we do with those at least 2 points of the value chain?
Well, on the GenCos side, I would say yes, the GenCos are trying because the whole object of the privatization of GenCos was to have them increase the capacity of their installation. Let's say, for example, a power plant has 900 megawatts installed capacity, but it's generating 200. We wanted for that power plant to ramp up to that 900. That was the intention. And I think it is a profit factor that should drive that. Because if you have that capacity, you will do all you can to improve. And I would say that most of the GenCos began to do this for those who could raise capital to do it. But it's still not enough. What you still need to have in more generation capacity in the country, and for that to be encouraged, because it's a fluke to think that 13,000 megawatts installed capacity should be good for a country of 200 million people who are eager to develop. So there needs to be a program to increase capacity, like in other countries, even Egypt here, just a few years back, they were not very far from where we are, but now they have significantly increased their capacity, and they're here on the soil of Africa. So I think that it's important to be increasing capacity in generation. Transmission I've talked about, but you have the fuel infrastructure. We shouldn't have we shouldn't have problem with the method by which we are fueling the power plants. The gas ought to be continuously improved on so that even the recovery of flared gas will help quite a lot. So you have the gas, you have the power plants And then the transmission infrastructure, when that needs to be looked at. So this way, when generators generate power, the transmission should be able to wheel the power to distribution companies with ease. These are
Right. So we're due for a break in a minute, Prof. But I'd like you to quickly touch on this, then we'll continue after the break. The Ministry of Power talked about this supervisory control and data acquisition mechanism, essentially, that is meant to help secure or at least monitor our grid and all of that. The question is, if this is really vital to security, because now we're blaming this on vandalism, why didn't we have it in place in the first place? Because I imagine this should have been, in fact, the first few things we'll do in trying to ensure that we have a stable grid, wheel the power the right way. But we'll go to break now. And when we return, we'll try to get your insights so that, especially because you've also been involved in some, power projects, essentially. You talked about the ABBA. So let's know how this should be done. In fact, you know what? Let's take your response, Prof. Then when we come back from break, we'll talk more on that. So what do you think about this SCADA? Why didn't we have it in place in the first place?
The SCADA is very, very important in any network because that's how you are able to remotely monitor what's going on the network. So it also helps with reduction in pilferage, power pilferage. In ABBA, we have that. So in our small network, we have it. You have to have it. So it's an absolute requirement. There's a intention for the country to get as part of the Siemens initiative. I think that's part of what should come with that. But of course, I'm not sure the status of it, but it's all part of what Siemens should have brought to support the network.
Well, Prof, the question then would be, why didn't we have it before now? You'll deal with that when we return from this break, Prof. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. We still have Professor Bath Naji, a former Minister of Power, with us this morning. Prof, you were talking about the SCADA and how important it is. Is it something we've ever used before? Why didn't we have it before now?
Well, I don't know exactly why it was not. Well, of course, we could say that because of the way the Nigerian electricity industry came together, that might be part of the reason. But certainly, when we were doing the power reform, it was part of the plan, because you have to have the plan and then begin to execute. And I believe that the Siemens initiative is a part of the implementation, but it needs to be in place.
Okay, well, one other angle to that one, I mean, is this something we've ever used before?
We haven't, we began to do, there began to be installation, but it wasn't controlling the entire network of the country now.
Interesting. Well, you heard just before we returned from this break talk around electricity subsidy. I want to believe that it's not something that you're hearing for the first time, Prof.
No. And actually, what the chairman of the Regulatory Commission said is correct. You cannot run the system on life support. You have to have and in fact, the responses by the government now in terms of subsidy is the only way, because electricity is not something that you can say you go and buy in the market and then you bring home. It is something that is instantaneous. And so if there is need for subsidy in order to continue to make it to work, the government, the part of government that should provide provide the funds, we'll do it, which is why the Ministry of Finance is doing what it's doing. But what we are saying is that the subsidy cannot be the way to continue to run the place. That the distribution companies should be able to collect, because it's collection efficiency. If a distribution company is collecting, say, at 50% rate of the power given to it, then it has to improve. And I believe that the Regulatory Commission is compelling distribution companies to continue to improve. And that is the way it is supposed to be. But it requires, of course, investment so that you don't have this tremendous leakage that you continue to have in various distribution areas. So that is very important. So the subsidy is significant because the generation companies must continue to generate power. And the only way they can continue to generate power is if they are paid. If they are not paid, they can't generate power.
Isn't that indulging the system further, Prof?
No, that's what I'm saying is that you have to while you are doing subsidy, the goal is continue to reduce subsidy. In fact, it's always the way it's supposed to be done. If you are doing subsidy now, you have to continue to reduce subsidy over time. Maybe you have a plan for 2 years, 3 years that the subsidy should go out entirely. But that during this period, all the measures that should be taken to ensure that the system performs at its best level, which means efficiency in collection and commercial efficiency at the distribution end, would be achieved. This is where, even if you look at power companies coming to build power plants, the only way they would build power plant is if they can be assured that they would be able to get their money back, and which is what the chairman of the Regulatory Commission is saying. But if you go to sign a power purchase agreement with a DisCo today, there are not many DisCos that are creditworthy enough to sign power purchase agreement with a generation company. In real power purchase agreement, let's say that the DisCo takes about 500 megawatts, which would to build a 500 megawatt power plant will cost nearly $1 billion. So that means that the GenCo is putting itself out for $1 billion upfront for a company, if it's doing bilateral agreement, a distribution company that is collecting at 50% efficiency. That's a problem. So that's where government now steps in and says, well, we will provide the cushion to ensure that you receive your money. But what we would like is for the distribution companies to become strong enough by their own investments in their system to be able to sign power purchase agreements on bilateral basis. That is the way to go.
We had this conversation yesterday with a former commissioner at the regulatory body, NERC. We had with the NUI secretary, Comrade Joe Ajeru, and also a player in the private sector. One of our guests was talking about how he believes, so there's this general belief that the off-grid power that we have in Nigeria is perhaps more than the on-grid power. And imagine he was saying that the power that Nigerians generate themselves from generating sets, from petrol, diesel, to the renewable solar. And a lot of investments actually go into this. I recall a company recently saying it had to spend over ₦1 billion on renewable energy, on alternative energy rather, in a particular year. So people are actually spending money on power, whether you like it or not. Yes, it's not going into the hands of the disco, but billions, trillions Nigerians are spending. So how do we convert all of that funds into some sort of investment for the power sector?
It is, if the discos improve, then the private companies or private individuals that are self-generating can now trust them. That's just the bottom line. If, and I agree that you have a lot more self-generation than what the system is able to deliver. That is because it requires some kind of audit to be sure. I know that we did this sort of audit in Aba, and we were quite amazed at how much power that private sector individuals or companies self-generate. And so what we need in the country is to just have an initiative to ensure that the distribution companies are able to improve, and that the generation companies will be able to ramp up and be able to generate more and more power, and there'll be investment, and the system is confident enough to allow bilateral agreements. Because if we now say that government should provide the sort of guarantee, that's significant. We should do some guarantee. Government should do some guarantee, but private sector can have bilateral agreement, power purchase agreement between the generation companies and the distribution companies. This is essential to have.
There's this willing buyer arrangement, and I wonder to what extent we can also tap into that. But, you know, I recall in 2012, you were also a guest this time on our sister program, Sunrise, and I think it was on August 18th, 2012. And in your opening comments, Prof, you said that the power situation is improving across the nation. That was what you said essentially in your opening comments. And I wonder what, close to 10 years down the line, what word or what statement would you use to describe the current power situation in Nigeria?
Well, I can go back to 2012 and say that in 2012, power was improving. We did everything. We saw that there was a lot of human impediment to power improvement, and we moved to cure that human impediment. So the workers had to sit up, and at the distribution end of the business, government compelled distribution companies to improve their collection. And I can tell you some distribution companies began to collect at 80, 90% of the power given to them. And that's what I am talking about in terms of efficiency of distribution. If that is happening, it means that more power will begin to reach the populace. And power at that time was improving. We had situations where you would just not have power outage for weeks. In some places, I can say it is everywhere. So I can only go back to 2012. Unfortunately, I can't say why, because I'm not running the power system now. If you ask me about the Habayas, I can talk about the place, what we expect it to be like.
Well, you have been Minister of Power, you're still in the power sector, but let's talk about another kind of power, and that is political power. 2023 is a beckoning, and you have also thrown your hat into the ring. And one is wondering, this build-up, what are your thoughts? And what are the things that you have in mind?
Okay, so you should say I was forced to throw my hat in the ring.
Your hat in the ring.
Yes, I was. The people were asking me to come and do this. Maybe it is my brother and colleague, Professor Soludo Factor, in play. So Anambra had an economist professor that is doing quite well, has done what it did in the economy of Nigeria. So you said Enugu has me, and why not? Why shouldn't I come out? I said, well, I have a company to run. They said, no, your company can run, but if you had put your system properly, that it should be able to run on its own. So you're not having a key man situation, which is true. We've done that for Geometric Power. But so when I wasn't budging, they went and bought their expression of interest form and the governorship form for me, and came and presented it to me. So there's a way that it will look if I just continue to say that I won't come out, and they have you have technocrats that may be able to help in improving things, and they are standing by the side, and they probably will be criticizing. So, here I am. I've come out.
Well, most certainly we'll expect a lot more from you. Now that you have been forced to accept, you will be forced to perform if you are forced to win. Professor Bath Naji.
Yes, if I'm forced to win, yes. There are so many steps. There are so many steps in the process, and it is a very, it's not a more straightforward environment.
Wow.
First, we have to do primaries, and then after primaries, then you have to do the actual election if you're successful. Okay. So there is no step that is not fraught with issues. Okay. But the thing I can say is that I know what to do when I am in any office. Every time I have been in the government office or the in academia, that's all I know. I use creative ways to address problems that I find in the system. Whether it was when I was in science and technology, I came to science and technology, and there was no ministry. So the Ministry of Science and Tech that you know today started from my hotel room in the Hilton, and we had to recreate the entire structure, stitch back the ministry departments that were thrown to various other ministries.
Okay.
And in a short time. So that's.
Well, we can only hope and aspire that things will pan out the way everyone wants for a better nation for us all. Professor Bath Naji, former Minister of Power, thank you so much for your time this morning. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.